Hi, and welcome to the Stephan Livera podcast focused on Bitcoin and Austrian economics. Today it is episode 100 with Pavol Rusnak. But first, before we carry on with the hardware wallet interview series, let me introduce the sponsors of the podcast. So firstly, look into Kraken, one of the top Bitcoin exchanges. They have an incredible focus on security. They've got Kraken Security Labs, which is working not just on the security of Kraken itself, but of other participants in the cryptocurrency world. They're known for acting ethically in the space. They're one of the longest standing Bitcoin exchanges. They're consistently rated the best. And if you're trading, you need to be somewhere with some of the best liquidity in the industry. They've got high trading volume and low fees, no minimum or hidden fees. Kraken have 24/7 support. And on the institutional and business solution side, they're very popular with institutions. They're providing the best-in-class accounting, reconciliation, and reporting services for cryptocurrency hedge funds, asset managers, and fund administrators. Don't forget, there's a Kraken OTC desk for those higher touch block trades. They offer 5 fiat currencies, and they've also got margin and futures trading. So to learn more and sign up, go to the Kraken link in the show notes. Next up is Unchained Capital. These guys are doing Bitcoin financial services, and they've got a 2 of 3 keys multi-signature vault. So there's a bit of focus around security. You can use Trezor or Ledger wallets, and you still maintain control because you still have 2 of the 3 keys, reducing that single point of failure risk. And also, if somebody were to attack you, they would need to take you to where your other key is as well. So it gives you a bit of buffer there. So if you create an Unchained vault, you also get 3 free months of access to Safety Move's Bitcoin Standard Research Bulletin. And Unchained also offer Bitcoin collateralized loans, allowing you to get USD liquidity without selling your Bitcoins. And it also means you don't trigger a capital gains tax event. So while that loan's outstanding, it's stored in what's called collaborative custody with Unchained, holding 1 of 3 keys. You hold a second key, and Unchained's independent third-party key agent hold the third key. To learn more and sign up, go to the Unchained Capital link in the show notes. So today we are carrying on with the hardware wallet interview series. I hope you guys are really enjoying the interviews so far. I think they've been quite educational and a good place for a newbie to get some info. So today we are interviewing Pavol, also known as Stick. He is the CTO of SatoshiLabs, the company behind Trezor. So with Pavol, we talk about making the world's first Bitcoin hardware wallet. We talk about multi-signature, as that's also quite interesting these days. We talk about PSBT and airgapping with an SD card. We talk about the privacy implications and how that will change with the coming Trezor suite. And also, I'm quite excited about this coming idea of Bitcoin-only firmware for the Trezor. So with that, on to the interview. Pavol, welcome to the show.
Hello.
So look, thanks for joining me in the hardware wallet interview series. And obviously, I had to get someone from Trezor on, so it was great to have you to join me. Let's start with a little bit on the background on you. Let's hear a little bit on how you got into Bitcoin and a little bit of your history with SatoshiLabs.
Yeah, all right. So I was born in Slovakia, but since 2002, I'm living in Prague. I moved there to study computer science at Charles University. And even during the studies, I already started to work at a company called SUSE Linux, which is one of the biggest commercial Linux vendors. And that got me into the world of open source because everything we did back then was open source, and I was collaborating a lot with people not only inside of our company but also with the competitors like Red Hat. But we got our own common goal to be a good Linux ecosystem, basically. And during that time, I think it was like 2012 or even a little bit before that, we started a hackerspace in Prague called Wormlab, and somehow there was a conference in 2011 called Bitcoin Conference, organized by Amir Taki, and he came to the hackerspace telling us about Bitcoins and how we should attend the conference, and it was pretty nice. And that's where I think maybe not for the first time, but maybe for the third time I met Slash, and we were discussing a lot about hardware aspects of Bitcoin, and basically it was mostly about mining, but then we were also talking about the security of the coins, and that it's a basically it's a huge problem to have private keys stored on your computer. And coincidentally, there was a talk at that particular 2011 conference by Clemens Kepp. He was a German professor, and he was presenting his idea of his students of a hardware wallet, and they were building that on Arduino. And we had a lot of discussion with Slash that it's probably not enough power because it would take like maybe 1 or 2 minutes to sign a transaction, and that's not very usable. And we played with the idea a little bit, but not very much, because I still was working at my previous company, and Slash was very busy with his Slash pool back then. And 1 year later, in 2012, there was a Bitcoin conference in London, and there was absolutely no mention of any hardware wallet effort. And that was the tipping point where we basically decided we should start doing this, because nobody is taking care of that really crucial and missing part of the ecosystem. And we started to tinker a little bit at the Burlmap hackerspace and playing with the ideas how it should work. And both me and Slash, we were software engineers. We basically had really no idea what we were doing at the time, but it was fun, and we learned a lot. And somehow the ecosystem also changed, and from the original idea where we wanted to produce like 100 devices for our friends and from the people we knew from the Bitcoin talk, the ecosystem got bigger. And it was in 2013 when Alena joined us and persuaded us basically that we should really start a company and do that in a really big batch. So that was how SatoshiLabs and Trezor was started. In 2013, there was an official company started back then.
Yeah, so look, it's obviously this is the world's first Bitcoin hardware wallet. What were some of the challenges and the trials that you faced along the way when you were building that first device, the Trezor
Yeah,
One?
like I mentioned, we had really no very good idea what we were doing back at the time. Funnily enough, Trezor was my first PCB ever created, and it seems it somehow worked fine. Obviously, there were a lot of other iterations later. And what in the beginning, what seemed to be the biggest problem, it turned out to be really easy. I mean, the electronics, and something that we have never thought might be a problem turned out to be a big problem. So we had the electronics ready in maybe 2013, but then we had a really huge problem with getting these electronics into either a metal casing or plastic casing, which was kind of crucial because we wanted to deliver a full product, not just the electronics board. And with the metal casing, we had a problem that the buttons were just too small. And at one point during the process, you need to put these aluminum parts into an acid, basically, to create this protective coating on top. And that's a very delicate process, because if you don't have this aluminum in acid for a long time, the protective coat will not get created. But if you keep that there for a long time, the acid will start to dissolve the parts a little bit. And the problem with buttons was they were just too small. So if we kept them in acid for like a minute, the protective layer was not there yet. But if it was like 1 minute and 15 seconds, the buttons were just completely dissolved suddenly. So there was a really, really delicate timing. And finally, we were able to figure it out. and moved on to creating a mold for injection molding. And this turned out to be also a really big problem because of again the small buttons and some other areas which in reality we had to postpone the launch of the plastic version for a couple of months, maybe half a year even. So this just never worked out with the original producer, and finally it was late 2000 or it was, I think it was like middle 2014, we were able to find a company in the Czech Republic which was able to produce both electronics and both plastic cases for Trezor, and we have this relationship since back then. And it's really healthy relationship because they can guarantee the electronics will fit into the plastics, and that's how we resolved the problem, basically, to find a good partner to help this with us. Another problem which turned out to be unexpected a little bit was the original idea is that we will produce just the hardware, and software wallet ecosystems will integrate the Trezor. But there were different priorities for the software wallet developers. So it turned out that we need to come up with our own web wallet, so our users can actually use Trezor. Luckily, some time later, all the software wallets started integrating Trezor. One of the best integrations now is available on Electrum, and we are happy about that because we want to be a part of the ecosystem. We don't want to tell people how to use Trezor. So I'm really happy that there are other options. And this was the original idea, but for a couple of years it wasn't possible. Yeah. So these two were the biggest challenges: manufacturing problem and the integration of Trezor into other parts of ecosystem.
Yeah, that's fascinating to hear from your point of view. I think from my point of view, it's for a long time it's been my typical recommendation for newbies that, you know, if you're a newbie and you need to get your coins off the exchange, I would normally tell them, hey, just get a Trezor. It's one of the well-known kind of products that you can give to a newbie, and that person can pretty much just plug it in, and it's mostly a nice web wallet interface for them. Although obviously there are some criticisms, but we might get to that later. But I think on the whole, it should be recognized that, you know, this is the first Bitcoin wallet, and it's, you know, to this day better than people leaving it on an exchange, right? But let's talk through some of the features then of the Trezor, because you've got two main products, right? This is the Trezor One and then the Trezor Model T. So do you want to just talk through, just at a high level, what are some of the main features of the different devices?
Yeah. So, like you said, Trezor One was the first hardware wallet, and it's also being used as a benchmark for any other upcoming wallet. And people are saying like, "Oh yeah, this feature is better than Trezor has, or this feature is worse than Trezor has." And the original idea was just very easy. We just want to have buttons and a display. The display being the crucial part, because we wanted to give a full verification available to user, so they could check not only the amounts they are sending, but also where the coins are being sent to. And this original design is very simplistic, it's minimalistic, it's very durable, even though it's made from plastic. But that has another advantage: it's very light. So if you drop it for, I don't know, 5 meters, it will survive, because it's even if it's made of plastic, it will survive such fall. And we plan to keep selling them because they are, like you said, they are the go-to solution for people, and we still think it's a very good product. Another model, like you said, is a Model T. It was released in February last year, 2018, and it's an evolution of the idea. where we replace the monochromatic, means black and white display with a colorful high-res display, and we replace the buttons with the touchscreen. It provides a much better user experience for people that need to use Trezor every day, or if you want to perform like more complex operations, if you are sending coins in one transaction to multiple people, it's much easier to check the correctness of the transaction on a bigger display. And we consider that as like a flagship of our products, and Trezor Model T Trezor One is like the entry level. That said, most of the core features, that means like management or Bitcoin related features, are also available on Trezor One. So if you don't care about expert features, Trezor One is perfect for you. Also, Model T has SD card, which allows us to perform some of the actions that are just not possible on Trezor One. We might get up to that later, but one of these is basically we can perform bootloader upgrade or firmware upgrade via SD card. So if the device is bricked for whatever reason, or if you just don't want to connect the device to the computer to perform the update, you could do that via SD card.
Great. So let's start with multi-signature. So I know that's something that is the focus is coming onto that a little bit now, and there's a little bit more desire for multi-signature. I know currently it is possible to do with Electrum, that you can run a multi-sig out of that and use Trezor devices as part of your multi-sig set. I know also that the Trezor has basically, it displays some additional details about that transaction when you're performing the multi-signature. So did you want to just outline some of the thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's funny to say. It's funny to hear that you say that the multisig is getting traction now, because that's obviously true. But also, it was getting traction back in 2015. So there are not only the hype cycles for the price of the Bitcoin, but also for various features. And back in 2015. We were discussing how to introduce the multisig in Trezor, and we were spending a lot of time with trying to come up with a great user experience, and we discussed how these multisig parties should be coordinated together, and we were experimenting with all of crazy synchronizing mechanisms via Jabber or WebRTC, so you could synchronize these parties over the browser. But then we realized we are basically inventing it seemed to us like we are inventing the whole new internet. So we kind of postponed that features and decided just to finish the multisig implementation inside of the device and see how the feature evolves. And it's nice to see that now there is another traction, and basically we have all these multisig features in the hardware wallets, and now we are trying to figure out how to make this user experience worthwhile for users. And one of the problems we had back then in 2015 was that there was not a very easy way how to prove that the multi-sig address is indeed being used. So if a software wallet shows you, all right, so this is the multi-sig address, you can use it, but still you don't have a proof that the connected device is indeed involved in that multi-sig scheme. So we came up with a mechanism that can basically a software wallet can tell the device, please show me this address, this multisig address, and there is a proof that you are indeed involved in that multisig setup. and the hardware wallet or Trezor in that case will look at this proof, and only if it is able to reconstruct that proof, it will show the multisig address on the display. So that way you can be really sure that the software wallet, that the address you see in the software wallet, and at the same time, if you see the address on Trezor, you can be sure that particular Trezor is indeed involved in that multisig scheme. This can be done best in Electrum. If you have a multisig setup backed via Trezor, there is an eye icon next to the address. And if you have free Trezors connected, there will be free eye icons next to the address, and you can just press first, second, or third, and it will show you the multisig address on the particular device, so you can check and really be sure that this Trezor was not omitted from the scheme and it's indeed being used.
Fantastic. And yeah, so that's actually something I've recently tested out as well with Electrum as well. I just wanted to make sure that part of it as well, that you really can see it. So when you click the eye in Electrum and then it shows on your hardware device that's plugged in. Although, yeah, so and then the other component with multi-signature is also now the idea and this concept of, well, we want to try to, in some sense, make it more difficult for an attacker. And one way to do that is not just multi-signature with the same manufacturer, but multi-signature with other device types. So can you talk to us a little bit on setting up a multi-signature with different hardware wallets?
Sure. So if you want to use different hardware wallets, and I think it's a good idea because then you are reducing the fragility of the setup. Basically, you need to find a solution that communicates with the hardware devices of different vendors. And one of these is Electrum, like we mentioned earlier. There is a really good blog post by Salim Rashid on his blog, where he describes experience and individual steps how to configure that, but actually it's pretty straightforward. There is a guide in Electrum. So if you just choose, I want to use multisig, I want to use a hardware backed multisig, and then it will try to look for the devices, and you will just pick the devices from the detected list, and it can create a scheme for that. There are also companies, for example, Casa. They are trying to make this process even more straightforward for people, and they also support different hardware vendors. And they also have some enterprise schemes, or maybe not enterprise, but aimed for common users, but they are commercial schemes where you can have Casa participating as one of the multisig parties. So in case something goes wrong, you can use their servers to recover the situation.
Great. Let's talk now about another concept is around backing up and the seed. And so related to that is this idea of Shamir's secret sharing. And so I know with Trezor, there is this SLIP39. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So the original standard for mnemonic seeds was called, or is still called, BIP39, and we came up with the definition in 2013. It was not an original idea. There were some other implementations predating that. One of them was Electrum, but it was never standardized, and we really felt that we need to put there a standard so other hardware and software wallets can implement that, and that way we could achieve interoperability of this seed. I'm really happy to say that now every hardware and even every single software wallet supports BIP39. So you can exchange these mnemonic backups as you wish. Like if your hardware wallet breaks down, you can buy another one, or even from another vendor, or use the software wallet if you want to recover that. And we thought it would be great to come up with another standard, again an open standard, so everybody can implement this, and we hope we will achieve interoperability of that with the Shamir secret sharing scheme. And the idea is actually very simple. Right now, if you initialize the Trezor, it will give you a set of words. They can be either 12 or 24 words, and you can use this mnemonic sentence to recover your device. Shamir's secret sharing scheme is a so-called threshold secret sharing scheme. So it will give you, for example, 5 sentences. They are 20 words long, and during the initialization, you would just say, "All right, so these are these 5 sentences, but it is okay to provide just 3 of them to fully recover the secret." There is one big advantage of on just splitting the old seed. If you have a BIP39 seed and you split that in a half, there is an issue. If somebody has half of your seed, then they can still recover half of the secret. But the Shamir scheme doesn't work that way. Like if you don't have enough shares, if you are under the threshold, you cannot recover anything, and that's a really big advantage. And I think this is the scheme that should be really used in case you want to have a function like that, and not to split the old seed by some custom scheme.
Right. So let me just clarify that. So
Yeah,
as I understand that, this is the 12 or 24 word seed. And what some people have been doing, which is not the recommended practice, is to actually split that 24 word seed up and say, oh, I'll put half here and half there. But that
exactly.
obviously puts them at a greater risk. Let's say if an attacker gets one of those halves, now it's easier for them to try and brute force you, or to try and figure out
The
what
rest,
your
yeah.
yeah. And so this method, you're saying to use Shamir's secret sharing,
Yeah.
you can split that in a way that, say, those 24 words, you can split that in a more clever way, right? And so make it so that even if they got 2 of 5 in that example, they would not be able to recover your seed, correct?
Exactly. If I, during the initialization, say you need 3 out of 5, you need 3 out of 5. Nothing less won't work. They wouldn't recover any even partially secret. So there is also an advanced version of Shamir, also described in the paper, and it's like a second level of Shamir where we introduce groups. So you could instruct Trezor to generate 2 groups of seeds, and each group will again have its threshold. So let me give an example. I have a group of family members, and I will say, all right, so we need 3 out of 5 of these family shares. Then I have a group of coworkers, and I would say, okay, we need 4 out of 6 of these coworker shares, and then I need 2 out of 2 of these group shares combined. So that way I can create like a really complex setup depending on who do I trust and who I don't trust. One of the parties could even be like a lawyer, so in case something happens to me, they can also interact. And this is something for the future for us to plan and to maybe discuss with the wider community which kind of schemes make sense for various scenarios.
Yeah. And so, as I understand it, the other thing I'm keen to ask is how would it be implemented? Is this something that you would put inside the Trezor web wallet interface, or would it be a separate program?
Actually, it's already implemented in the firmware, in our beta firmware, and you just instruct the Trezor via the web wallet that you want to perform the recovery of such shares or initialization, and the whole process is being done on the device. This has one big advantage, and obviously these shares are much stronger if they are properly distributed among different geographical areas. And in the future we would like to make this process totally independent of the computer. So you could just have a power bank and a Trezor and travel all across these locations, so you can recover them without a computer. So that's why the full process is being done now on Trezor device.
Right. Is that Trezor 1 or Trezor Model T only?
It's just a Trezor Model T for now.
Got it. Got it. Okay, great. Next thing I was really keen to discuss is this concept of air gapping, and I think that is also now starting to become a little bit more front of mind for people. And they're trying to be a little more security conscious. They are concerned about having to directly plug the device into the computer, and if the computer has malware, then okay, there's a risk there. And so some of the ideas I have heard and seen, so obviously there is the cold card. I know they have the SD card ability that you can transfer, you can ferry the transaction using that. And then the other idea that people are talking about now is QR codes. Do you have any thoughts there on whether that could be something coming in Trezor devices?
Yeah. First of all, I really do think that even if you use USB connection, you are already air gapped and protected from the malware. Obviously, there are some of the risks that might be hidden in the complexity of the USB stack. But that said, if you are not using USB stack, but then you are using SD card, there is another complexity hidden in the SD card driver or even in the file system driver. So you are just there is no silver bullet. You are just exchanging one set of trade-offs with another. That said, we want to give our users a choice. So it's obvious that with Trezor Model T having an SD card slot, we will, or we are already working on that feature. So in some of the future releases, Trezor Model T would be able to sign the PSBT transaction stored on the SD card. But like I said, it's not a silver bullet, because still there is no like a physical connection, but still there is data from the computer present on the SD card, and we would need to still audit the security of not only just of the SD card drivers, but file system drivers and even the PSBT parser as well. And another air gapping method you mentioned is a QR code. This is even better, it might seem, because there are no physical data present, or how would I say? But there was one moment in the past that really struck me, and one of our external collaborators and security researchers, Christian Reiter, he found a buffer overflow in BEG32 encoding or decoding, and it was properly disclosed to all other vendors. It was not like a very critical bug, because it could just introduce maybe 2 or 3 extra bytes, unexpected extra bytes. But then I realized, well, this can also be used to exploit a system via the QR code, because if you are able to create buffer overflow in address decoder, basically, then you can get that piece of vulnerability over the QR code as well. So even that is not like 100% secure, but still this is kind of really esoteric or not really possible hacks, I would say. An obvious disadvantage is that you would need to have a camera on a hardware wallet, which makes it harder to produce, and it increases the price and increases the length of the process and so on. So like I said earlier, the original Trezor Model 1 was aim to be really simplistic, and we are hesitant about adding new features, and it takes some time for us to evaluate that.
Right, I see. Yeah, and I mean, I suppose I take your point that QR codes are not a silver bullet, but I wonder whether they might be seen as at least one step closer, or at least one, at least a bit closer to being harder to hack than, say, the SD card option or the direct
Sure.
plug USB, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
There is
but and
one.
yeah, sorry, go on.
I just wanted to say final words on that topic, and that's there is another big disadvantage, and that is that user experience hurts because then you have to swap either SD cards, or you can only fit 1 kilobyte of data into QR code, and then the QR code is like really complex. So if you want to transmit a regular Bitcoin transaction, which is usually bigger than kilobyte, then you would need to exchange a set of QR codes. And well, it's I think it might be more secure in some sense of things, but then if you are making process obscure, then it is more error prone, and then also security is hurt because people can do mistakes, and they will do mistakes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point as well. You've got the process fatigue risk, but I suppose for the people who are storing, lots and lots of value, for them, they would think it's probably worthwhile. But I totally appreciate from your point of view as well. It's a business, and you've got to find that sweet spot in terms of what are people willing to pay for, right? But
Yeah.
maybe you would have like different devices and like a really higher end device which has like all the bells and whistles and that kind of thing. But yeah, I understand, and it's hardware, so hardware is not an easy thing to make. So totally appreciate
Yeah.
that as well. Another point I think is interesting for listeners, and it's probably useful for them to know. And just from my recent interview with Andrew Chow, he was pointing out as well, he had some difficulties in trying to implement hardware wallet interface HWI with
Mm-hmm.
Trezor 1 versus Trezor Model T. And the reason was with the Trezor 1, you actually can't input the pin physically on the device. You've
Yeah.
actually got to do the scrambled pin on the computer. Whereas with the Model T, you actually can enter the pin directly on the device. And I think even if you want to try the passphrase recovery, you can do it directly on the Model T device. So listeners might want to know that as well, just for if they are thinking about, okay, future HWI support and additional security advantages that come from being able to enter directly on the device.
Yeah, so like we said earlier, Trezor Model T has a touchscreen, so we really want to make it possible to enter every possible piece of information directly on the device, so it never touches the computer. And like you said, it's not only limited to PIN. There is a really nice feature of Trezor Model T, and that's if you unless you enter the PIN, the USB communication is not even enabled. So on Trezor Model 1, you need to start the USB communication in order to perform this scrambled PIN entry. So that brings also another level of security. And with the passphrase, for Model 1, you need to enter it on a computer. There's just no other way yet, but we are exploring various ways how to enter passphrase directly on Trezor Model 1, but because there are just 2 buttons, you are very limited, and we don't want to make this process awkward, because if this process is awkward, then usually you end up with a really simple passphrase, kind of defeating the purpose altogether. The Model T is much better because you have a touchscreen, and I personally use rather complex passphrase, and still I am able to enter it directly on the device.
Great. Look, so let's talk a little bit about Trezor hacks and some of these other angles. I suppose just firstly for the listeners, if you're a newbie listener, some of this stuff might scare you, but remember it's all relative here, and you're better off using a hardware device than leaving it on an exchange. But that said, I think it's useful as well just to make everyone aware. These are the hacks and so on that can occur. So some of the different ones I've seen I mean, there's a range of them, right? So I think there was one around trying to infer from the signal, what was the pin or the passphrase. There's the other ones where if the attacker has physical access to the device, that they're able to kind of reverse out or pull out the seed and the pin and just access from there. Did you want to just discuss around what was your process around that and then trying to mitigate against those?
Yeah, sure. So security, including physical security, is a very complex topic, and I have to admit I'm also learning it as it goes. And what I learned in the process is everything, be it hardware or software, is hackable. And the only thing that changes is the price of the attack. So if the attacker is motivated and has enough resources, be that either people or money, they can get to your coins. Even if they are moral standards are low, they can maybe mug you and torture you for the pin or for the passphrase. So no extraction from the device itself is needed, so to say. Um, We've foreseen this, and like I said, the BIP39 was introduced in 2013, and even that, the original release of that standard contained a passphrase. So it's an idea where you just don't use the seed store in the device to generate the keys, but you also use that passphrase, which is being added in the mix, and only after providing the passphrase you can generate or derive the keys. One great property of this is that every passphrase is correct, so to say, because there is no mechanism to check the correctness of the passphrase. So what you can do is you can have a small amounts of bitcoins stored with empty passphrase, then maybe you can create a simple passphrase like airplane and put some more bitcoins onto there, and then you can have like super secret, super complex passphrase where you would put most of your holdings into. And in case you are in the troubled situation, you can show the attacker this simple passphrase, and there's no other way, or there's no way how to prove there is another secret passphrase. So that was the original idea behind the passphrases, but also the protection of the physical security was another one in case the seed will get compromised.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think I'm I guess I'm just a little unsure how safe the passphrase part really can make you against, like, if they're there with you right there,
Yeah.
because in reality they could just keep hitting you, right? They could just keep, they could just keep hitting you until you give them everything, and who knows? I mean, they because even if they're a smart attacker and they know how a Trezor works, or they know how pretty much every hardware wallet works with the passphrase, they could just keep going until they get everything, I suppose. But at the same time, it's there to provide some level of protection. I think the other question that came up from some of the hardware hacks and so on was around what length does your passphrase have to be to keep you safe? Because theoretically, if an attacker gains physical access to your Trezor device, you've run a very short passphrase, they may be able to brute force that, and it might not take them that long to do that kind of attack. So can you just tell us a little bit of your thoughts around what length does it need to be safe?
Yeah, so we published a post on our blog titled "Is Your Passphrase Strong Enough?" where there are lots of good practices and recommendations how to come up with a good passphrase. You could either use a diceware to generate basically another sentence of words that you memorize, or you can use a random generator to create a lowercase sequence of characters, and so on. And there is even a nice table included in the blog post. And for example, uh, right now, if you use 13 lowercase letters for the passphrase, the attack would cost around $1 billion. So obviously, that's a lot. This will change in the following 10 years because we have better computers every year. But still, even in 2030, the cost of this attack would be $10 million. And then we could discuss, like, if an attacker has $1 billion right now, what is easier to perform, like perform a hardware level attack on some very sophisticated hardware wallet, or to perform a brute force attack on a passphrase. So we are basically providing all these means to make it harder for an attacker, but in the end, it's the resources of the attacker that matters, and the other important factor is time. We want to make it as hard as possible for the attacker to attack that effectively, and if the attack takes, I don't know, 2 weeks to perform, then we are pretty much on the safe side, because if I do realize during that 2 weeks that my hardware wallet is missing, I can still send the coins out of this device. And that's a really big improvement, because, for example, if your, I don't know, credit card is hacked, you need to replace the device. But in that case, you can just generate a new passphrase and send the coins to another passphrase, for example.
Right. Yeah. And I think the other thing as well is the length of the passphrase that's required to make it safe. So some of the best practices and so on, like if you look at, say, I think there was a Coldbit blog post, and I think from there it was basically saying, okay, remember, humans are very bad at doing random or generating random numbers or characters. Best to use these diceware lists. And so you might sit there rolling dice and come up with a list of 6 or 7 words and use that as your passphrase to help keep you more safe against the attacker. But that also does bring in another whole layer, because now you have to think about that from backups and restoration point of view. Because let's say I need to think estate planning. How do I pass it on to my heirs or to my family? Yeah. That's also an additional consideration. And the challenge then, I suppose, is there is a risk that the user will not correctly back up the passphrase as well as the seed and pass it and put it in some way that their family can access it when they die.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so I suppose that's just the main risk I might just call out for the listeners. But absolutely, the passphrase is a good recommended practice. But just be aware of that backup and restoration and estate planning aspect of it as well. Okay, so let's talk about now privacy. So this is also another topic that people are becoming a little bit more aware on and are starting to take some further steps. I suppose right now, if a newbie just buys a Trezor and they just use it, and they plug in and they go to wallet.trezor.io and so on, and they initialize that device, they are at that point, are they sharing their XPub, the way to generate all their addresses, with the Trezor web server?
At the moment, that's correct. You are sharing the XPub with the whatever backend you are using. So if you are using our backends, that's true. Also, it's a little bit more complicated. It depends on the coin. For some coin, you are not sharing the whole XPub, just the individual addresses, and it depends on whether there is an optimization for key derivation on the server or not. But that said, there is a way how you can use our backend run locally. So if you don't want to do that, you can download our backend sources, because these are also open source, and run them for yourself. Another option how to initialize the device without XPubs being shared, for example, is you can install Python Trezor package, which contains Trezor CTL command line tool, and this can perform most of the stuff you want to do with your device. So either initializing or getting addresses or sending transactions, but that's a little bit too low level for regular use. But for initialization of the device, it's just perfect. And there is always Electrum, like we said. You can use Electrum, and then you can connect to whatever address server you want to use, even or your own one. And when it comes to privacy, we have a really big bulk of improvements coming up end of this year or maybe beginning of the next year. And the idea is that we want to create a desktop software called Trezor Suite. So it will do everything that the current web wallet does, but in a desktop environment. And then there would be an option for the user to run the local Bitcoin Core instance. So the Trezor Suite software could connect to it directly, or you could use Tor to connect to our backends if you don't want to run a local Bitcoin Core instance, but you want to use our servers, but still you want to protect your privacy. And with this Trezor Suite, we want to make this process as easy as possible. So our current idea is to just have like a really, really simple checkbox, like I want to run the Bitcoin Core instance locally, and if you check it, it will do everything for you and connect to the fully synced instance. Or even if you want to use our backends via Tor, again, we want to make it as easy as possible for the user.
No, that's really good. I didn't know about Trezor Suite coming. Is that a relatively new thing?
Well, we've been cooking that for quite some time, but there are a lot of challenges and not only technical ones, but also a lot of discussions about how the user experience should look. And yeah, like I said, we want to make it as easy as possible because that's our goal. We want to make things secure, but also very, very usable, because only if they are easy to use, they are indeed secure.
Got it. Okay, yeah, so look, let me just summarize that for the listeners if they're a newbie and they couldn't quite follow everything there. Basically, right now, if you use a Trezor with the standard web wallet, if you just go to wallet.trezor.io, you are giving up your XPub when you first initialize, meaning that the Trezor web server can, kind of know your balances, right? Because that's how it knows your balances. And if you use it on Electrum without using something like Electrum Personal Server, Electrum X, or Electrum Rust server, you're kind of giving off the transaction data to the public server. But the good part is, if Trezor Suite is coming, then that is a potential way that you can set up wholly on your own computer, and or using Tor in such a way that you're not giving up as much of your privacy. Or if you're using your own local Bitcoin Core, then it's done in a way where you're not giving up any of your own information about your balances to the Trezor web server. Would you say that's a fair summary?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Also, there is another option, like you mentioned at the beginning of the interview. There is a project called HWI, which allows you to connect hardware wallet to local running Bitcoin Core instance. So that's also an option, but it might be tricky for common people to use. But that's the best thing you can do, because only if you are running your own Bitcoin Core instance, then you can be really sure there is no middleman between you and the Bitcoin blockchain.
Fantastic. All right. Let's talk about the question of Bitcoin only. So
Yeah.
I think if I were to try and just reflect some of the what I'm going to call quote unquote Bitcoin community sentiment, I think some of the more hardcore Bitcoiners feel like they get a bit paranoid when there's an update coming on their Trezor device because they're worried that, I don't care about shitcoin support. I just want to keep my Bitcoin safe. Um, is there a additional risk there around having other altcoins in or support for them versus the kind of Bitcoin only? But at the same time, I want to be fair to you. I want to recognize you're a business, and so you've got to make sales. So I don't fault you for that. But what are your thoughts around the idea of having and I don't know, this is a topic you might have touched on before around the possibility of having Bitcoin only firmware.
Yeah. So obviously, we were born and raised in a Bitcoin community, and this is what we are coming from. And I'm 100% Bitcoin. I don't own any other coins. We are Bitcoin maximalists, but to be frank, if it were not for altcoins, we would not survive the years 2017 and 18. And this is something not a lot of people realize. And it's very easy for the new hardware wallets that came up recently to say, all right, so we don't do shitcoins. And personally, if the situation wasn't that bad 2 years ago, I wouldn't add these alternative coins as well. But there are also some voices among the company and outside of the company that are basically saying, all right, so there are people that will get into altcoins and then they realize there is only Bitcoin. So that's also kind of a little bit more stressful maybe, but also an onboarding of new Bitcoin users through these altcoins acquisitions. So there is more things to that. And when it comes to frequency of the updates, people are saying, oh, you are just adding some altcoin stuff and I need to update all the time. Well, that's not really the case, because every time there is a firmware update, there is some Bitcoin or management feature also being added. So I don't remember any firmware update that included only altcoin related changes. And of course, people are asking for Bitcoin only firmware, and we've done some steps to that already. And it would obviously make our release process a little bit harder, because then we will release two sets of features in two firmwares on each update. But this is something we are going to do. And I'm not sure if it will be the next update or the update afterwards, but yeah, we would really like to deliver that functionality to our users, or this stripped down functionality in a Bitcoin only firmware to our users.
Great. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think. So FIDO2 authentication. So, did you want to just touch on that as a feature? What is it, and what should the Bitcoiners be thinking about when they want to use FIDO2?
Yeah. So I would say most of the people that are interested in Bitcoin got somehow in contact with U2F, because of some of the exchanges are introducing various forms of second factor authentications. So second factor authentication is a very simple concept when you have something you have and something you know. And in the case of U2F, the something you have is a hardware token, and something you know is the password. So when you are logging into the application or web application, you need to provide a username and a password, and then the website will ask you for confirmation on a hardware token, and usually that's YubiKey, because that's the company that pioneered that approach, and that's better than the second factor authentications via SMSs, for example, because the SMS network could be somehow intercepted and decoded. And there were also a lot of social engineering attacks on calling to mobile phone operators and persuading them to transfer the SIM card to some other person. So there are a lot of other issues. And FIDO2 is another generation of such authentication method, and it's backwards compatible with U2F. So it could work the same way as the old U2F authentication, but also includes something that I call passwordless authentication. And there are again two factors included: something you know, that's a hardware token, and something you have, that's a hardware token, and something you know, and that's a pin to a hardware token. So if you have a hardware token that is protected by a pin, you can get rid of the password basically. And if you have got rid of the password, you can very easily get rid of the username, because you can use some public key to identify you in the system instead of the username. So what FIDO2 allows you is to, or it provides you a very simple and standardized way for a system application, web application, to ask you for identity, and then you can provide that using a hardware device, and the hardware device can verify the correct person is using that, because there is PIN involved in the process. And this process is really straightforward, because it gets rid of all these hassles. And I've been reading about FIDO2 for since maybe 2 years. We were reading some preliminary drafts of the specification, and that seemed like a really great thing to do. But only recently, a week ago, my colleague presented the FIDO2 in our firmware, and I was like totally blown away. Like the user experience of FIDO2 on Model T was just amazing. It would just show the name of the service on the display, and your identity being some username in the system, for example, and then you would just scroll among the identities on the device. If there are more, you can of course register twice on the same service, and then you just confirm it on a Trezor, and you are automatically logged in. No password, nothing else.
Yeah, that's great. And I definitely can reflect from my own use with the Model T. It is quite a. I haven't had a chance to use FIDO2 on it, obviously, but I do notice the user interface is quite easy to use. Um, so look, Pavel, I think that's mostly the key questions I had for you. But did you have any closing thoughts on what we can expect to see coming from SatoshiLabs and Trezor devices? I mean, you mentioned the Trezor suite before, but just let us know if there's anything you would like to say about Trezor right now.
Yeah, so I think we covered most of the most exciting changes that are in the pipeline, like Shamir backup or FIDO2 or PSBT via SD card. And these things are in the pipeline for some time already, but it takes some time to fully understand the feature when it's not a feature designed by us, for example, like FIDO2. Also, it's very hard to even come up with your own feature, for example, like Shamir. So there are a lot of discussions, and this takes some time. and also lots of testing and implementing. But the good news is all of these are already in like a testing phase, internal testing phase. So I'm really hope that these will be rolled out very, very, very soon. And then the big leap would be the Trezor suite, the desktop application for Trezor that I mentioned, with all these extra features that were just not possible when using the web application. So either it's Tor connection to backend servers or connecting to a local Bitcoin Core instance. And I'm really excited to see that, because we think we will make it even better for people to be private and self-sovereign, and while maintaining the same level of user experience they are really used to.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the Trezor suite coming out and some of those features as you mentioned. I think I'd definitely be keen to give those a try. So look, I think that's basically it. But yeah, obviously, before we let you go, Pavol, can you just tell my listeners where they can find you online, and if they want to get a Trezor, where should they go?
Yeah, sure. So the easiest way how to contact me is on Twitter. I'm Pavol Rusnak on Twitter. Trezor also has its Twitter account. It's twitter.com/Trezor. Everything we do is open source, like I said. So github.com/Trezor. There are all possible sources to firmware backends, and obviously you can find me on GitHub among the GitHub issues as well. We do all the development in public, so you can see all the features we are working on. And the Trezor website is Trezor.io, where you can get your devices. And we have a small gift for our listeners, because this episode is episode 100, if I'm correct.
Yes, it is.
So we decided to give our listeners a promo code. So if you use promo code SLP100 in our Trezor shop, you will get a discount for Trezors. And this promo code is valid for 1 week.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much going to do it for us. So thank you again for joining me today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and it was nice to see you and to chat in virtual person.
Hope you guys enjoyed that interview. Remember, you can get the show notes and subscribe to the show on my website, stephanlivera.com. Also, just a reminder to share this episode and the Hardware Wallet interview series with your friends so they do not leave their Bitcoins on an exchange and risk getting wrecked. That's it from me, guys. Thank you, and I will see you in the Citadels.